Most people stop when they're tired, when life gets hard, when no one's watching. But the truth is, you are never finished. David Goggins didn't just write a book. He wrote a battle plan for anyone who refuses to quit. This is Never Finished, the audiobook that will change the way you think about pain, purpose, and discipline forever. Welcome back to CliffNote Chronicles. Today we are going to listen another masterpiece written by David Goggins, Never Finished. So let's get started with introduction. Have you ever felt that life is quietly slipping through your fingers, that you are capable of more, much more, yet something unseen keeps holding you back? Have you ever looked into the mirror and known, deep down, that you are not the person you were meant to be? If you have, then Never Finished by David Goggins is not just a book for you. It's a mirror, a battlefield, and a brutal wake-up call. This isn't a soft, motivational pep talk. It's an unflinching journey into the dark corners of the human spirit, where excuses die and growth begins. David Goggins is not your typical motivational speaker. He is a man forged in hardship, a living testament to the relentless power of the human mind when pushed beyond comfort. Born into poverty and abuse, scarred by racism, learning disabilities, and a violent childhood, Goggins began life as what he calls a born loser. Yet, through unimaginable suffering and the discipline of self-reinvention, he transformed himself into something entirely new. A U.S. Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, ultra-endurance athlete, world record holder, best-selling author, and one of the most respected voices in the world of personal development. He is not here to sell you a fantasy. He's here to show you what it takes to break the mental chains that have kept you average. When Goggins first released Can't Hurt Me, millions were stunned by his story. A man who turned trauma into triumph, pain into power, and weakness into a weapon. But Never Finished begins where that book ended. It's not a sequel about success. It's about what happens after you've conquered your old demons, when the applause fades and comfort starts to creep back in. Because comfort, as Goggins says, is the silent killer of growth. Never Finished is a declaration that self-mastery is not a one-time transformation. It's a lifelong pursuit. In this book, Goggins invites you into what he calls his mental lab, a place where suffering becomes science, where every failure is an experiment, and where the human mind is tested, broken, rebuilt, and tested again. He teaches that the road to greatness is not paved with motivation or good intentions, but with discipline, self-honesty, and a willingness to face pain head-on. The message is clear. You will never become who you're meant to be if you keep running from discomfort. You must train your mind to do the hard things, especially when you don't feel like it. Goggins doesn't sugarcoat it. Life will hit you in the mouth. You will fail, fall, and be tempted to quit. But in those moments of weakness, when everything inside you screams for relief, you are being offered a choice, to stay the same or to evolve. And that, he says, is where the real growth happens. Because the person you are today is only the starting point, the raw material. Through the furnace of effort, pain, and self-discipline, you can forge a new identity, one decision at a time. The big promise of Never Finished is both simple and profound. There is no finish line. No matter how far you've come, there's always another level of strength, courage, and resilience waiting to be discovered within you. Goggins challenges you to live a life of constant evolution, to stop blaming others, to stop waiting for the right conditions, and to take complete ownership of your future. He promises that belief, real, unshakable belief, is not something you are born with, but something you build through repeated acts of courage and persistence. You don't need motivation, you need to master yourself. You don't need comfort, you need conviction. Throughout this book, you'll hear stories of heart surgeries, near-death experiences, physical collapse, and the daily grind of maintaining greatness. You'll learn that suffering isn't something to avoid but to study, to dissect, and to use. Because inside pain lies the blueprint of your evolution. You'll see that discipline is not punishment. It's freedom, the gateway to confidence and self-respect. And above all, you'll discover that the greatest enemy you will ever face isn't fear, failure, or circumstance. It's the soft voice in your mind whispering that you've done enough. Never Finished is not just a book. It's a challenge to humanity. It's Goggins pointing his finger at every one of us and saying, "You think you've done enough? You haven't even started." He wants you to stop searching for balance and start demanding more from yourself, to live with intensity, honesty, and purpose. Because when you accept that life is a constant process of becoming, you unlock the freedom to live without limits. So as you listen to these words, remember, this is not about motivation. It's about mastery. Not about achievement, but evolution. Not about finding peace, but finding power. David Goggins wrote Never Finished to prove that the human spirit is unbreakable. And if you are willing to confront your pain, own your story, and rise each time you fall, then you too can become never finished. There's a moment in every person's life when the mirror becomes a window, when you stop seeing who you are and start seeing who you could be. Chapter 1 of Never Finished, titled Maximize Minimal Potential, is that moment. It's the story of David Goggins' raw reckoning with himself. A confrontation so painful and honest that it changed the trajectory of his entire life. This isn't just a motivational tale about turning pain into power. It's a lesson in ownership, responsibility, and the terrifying beauty of human transformation. We meet Goggins at 24 years old, a man at rock bottom. Overweight, broke, and trapped in a job he hates, working nights as an exterminator, killing cockroaches in greasy restaurant kitchens for $1,000 a month. A man suffocating in self-doubt, depression, and regret. But before he could rebuild, he had to face the truth, not the version he told others, but the one buried deep beneath excuses, denial, and emotional scars. He takes us back to the painful memories that shaped him, growing up in an abusive home under the iron fist of his violent father, David Goggins. A man who beat him, his brother, and their mother mercilessly. A man whose cruelty defined David's early years and filled his childhood with fear. Eventually, his mother escaped that nightmare, moving them to Indiana, but trauma doesn't stay behind when you change addresses, it follows you. Goggins describes how racism, poverty, and learning disabilities compounded his pain, how he became a master of disguise, hiding his suffering behind lies and shortcuts, pretending to be okay when he was slowly dying inside. By the time he reached adulthood, Goggins had become numb. He had dreams of joining the military, but every time life demanded more of him, he quit. He failed the ASVAB test multiple times, gave up during pararescue training, and spiraled into hopelessness. In his words, he was a shell of a man. And yet, as this chapter reveals, that breakdown became his breakthrough. One night, in the darkness of his own misery, he made a choice that would define everything that came after. He decided to drive back to Buffalo, New York, to the house he had escaped as a child, to confront the monster who haunted him, his father. He thought he was going to find answers. In reality, he was about to find himself. When he arrived, he discovered a different version of David, old, weak, and broken. Not the devil he remembered, but a man destroyed by his own demons. And in that moment, David realized something that would become the foundation of his philosophy, that his father wasn't his flaw. His past wasn't his prison. It was his story, and only he could decide what it would mean. Here lies the big promise of this chapter, the first and perhaps most important of the entire book. You cannot control the circumstances you were born into, but you can control what you do with them. You can't always choose your potential, but you can choose to maximize it. Goggins says, "It ain't your fault you were dealt a bad hand, but it is your responsibility." That single line becomes a declaration of war on victimhood, because as long as we keep blaming others, our parents, our trauma, society, luck, genetics, we remain prisoners of the past. Freedom only comes when we claim ownership of everything that has ever happened to us, good or bad. On that long drive home from Buffalo, something changed inside him. He realized that his minimal potential, the little spark buried under the weight of pain, fear, and excuses, was still alive. He had no right to waste it. From that moment, Goggins stopped negotiating with weakness. He decided to live with urgency, to treat every day like his golden hour, the critical window in which a medic must save a life. Only in this case, the life he was trying to save was his own. The story of Maximize Minimal Potential is not about overnight success. It's about raw accountability, the kind that burns. It's about looking at your life without filters and saying, "This is on me." It's about confronting the version of yourself that has been hiding behind fear, excuses, and self-pity, and refusing to let that version run your life anymore. Goggins compares human growth to a seed planted in darkness. Some seeds are blessed with rich soil, sunlight, and water. Others are buried in rock and shadow. Most never sprout. But there are a few, rare, relentless, that fight their way to the light on their own. He promises that resilience can be built, even from broken beginnings. He swears that no matter how bad your story starts, you can rewrite the ending, if you're willing to dig through the dirt. He calls this the haven of low expectations, the place most people live their whole lives, where mediocrity feels safe and excuses feel justified. Leaving that haven is terrifying. It means stepping into discomfort, where nothing is guaranteed except pain and growth. But as Goggins says, comfort is the silent killer of potential. By the end of the chapter, Goggins stands reborn, not because life suddenly got easier, but because he stopped running from difficulty. The transformation begins the moment he takes complete ownership of his life. This chapter is the awakening, the shift from helplessness to hunger, from victimhood to victory, from excuses to execution. And that's what makes Maximize Minimal Potential such a powerful start. It's not just his story, it's a mirror held up to all of us. Goggins is telling every listener, every reader, that no one is coming to rescue you. You must become your own hero. The big promise he makes here is brutal yet liberating. You are responsible for your own evolution. You may have been born with minimal potential, but if you face your pain, accept your truth, and take action, you can become unstoppable. Through his tears, his failures, and his final decision to rise, Goggins gives us the first commandment of the never-finished philosophy. You are not done. You are never finished. And no matter how broken your start, there is always another level waiting inside you. This is Chapter 1, the rebirth of a man who stopped surviving and started living. The challenge is simple, but the work is endless. Maximize whatever potential you have, because nobody else will do it for you. One of the most honest, raw, and soul-shaking explorations of human fragility, resilience, and ownership ever written. This is not your typical Christmas story filled with joy and peace. This is a holiday drenched in self-confrontation, revelation, and survival. Here, Goggins digs into what it means to truly bet on yourself when no one else believes, to face physical and emotional collapse, and to reclaim your life through unshakable self-belief and relentless discipline. The chapter begins in late December 2018. For most people, Christmas is a time of warmth and family, of music, food, and laughter. But for Goggins, Christmas has always been a haunting reminder of pain. As a child, his father turned the holiday into another business day at the skating rink, using it for profit rather than family. Later, when tragedy struck and his mother's fiancé was murdered just after Christmas. That time of year became permanently associated with trauma. And yet, on this particular Christmas, Goggins is in a new phase of life. His first book, Can't Hurt Me, is a massive success, inspiring millions around the world. But beneath the surface, he senses that life is testing him again. New York, the very place where their father terrorized them, and pay respects at their father's grave. Goggins is stunned. His brother, trapped in denial, has rewritten their childhood memories into something less painful, less real. For him, Buffalo is nostalgia. For Goggins and his mother, it is a graveyard of trauma. The contrast between their perceptions reveals a fundamental truth. We all experience pain differently, but how we process it determines who we become. Goggins sees in his family a reflection of the many ways people deal with suffering. Some bury it, some deny it, some rewrite it. But as he explains, denial may feel like protection, yet it robs us of growth. His mother, though successful in life, still refuses to face the full scope of her pain. His brother has built a fantasy to escape it. Goggins, on the other hand, confronts it head-on, because he's learned that unresolved pain becomes a mental anchor, dragging you backward no matter how far you try to run. This moment becomes one of the chapter's big promises, that freedom only comes when you face your truth. You can't heal from what you won't acknowledge. As the chapter unfolds, Goggins shifts the focus from family to personal crisis. While celebrating the success of Can't Hurt Me with his partner Kish, he suddenly feels his heart racing uncontrollably. His pulse skyrockets from 50 beats per minute to 150. He's sweating, dizzy, and fighting for breath. Having undergone 2 heart surgeries in the past, Goggins instantly knows what's happening. Atrial fibrillation, a dangerous irregular heartbeat. The timing is poetic and cruel. At the very moment when the world is celebrating his rise, his own body begins to fall apart. In the emergency room, surrounded by chaos and fluorescent lights, Goggins faces another kind of battle, the fight between fear and acceptance. He describes how, years earlier, surgeries and near-death moments didn't scare him. Back then, he felt invincible. But now, with age, experience, and love in his life, mortality hits differently. He feels fear, not for pain, but for unfinished purpose. And that realization becomes the heartbeat of the chapter. Even when you've achieved success, you are never finished. Life will test you again and again to see if your growth is real or temporary. The doctors eventually prepare to shock his heart back into rhythm. Imagine the intensity. Electrodes on his chest and back, his partner in tears, and Goggins, the man known for superhuman toughness, suddenly fragile, human, and afraid. They hit him with 200 joules of electricity. His body jerks violently, and for a moment, there is silence. Then pain. Blinding, searing pain. But when his heart rhythm stabilizes, his mind awakens stronger than ever. That pain becomes his teacher once again. In that sterile hospital room, he realizes something profound. When you achieve something great, life will find a way to test your humility and your hunger. Comfort is the enemy of greatness. Every level of success comes with a new level of suffering designed to see if you still have the grit to evolve. The lesson is universal. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've accomplished. The moment you get comfortable, you stop growing, and when you stop growing, you start dying. This chapter is also a deep reflection on belief, not the kind of belief that comes from positive thinking or external validation, but belief forged in the fires of isolation and failure. Goggins reminds us that nobody believed his story at first. He was rejected by publishers, dismissed by agents, told that his life wasn't marketable. But he trusted himself enough to take the ultimate risk. He self-published his book, poured in his own money, and bet his entire life savings on his vision. And that gamble paid off. Can't Hurt Me became a global bestseller not because it was marketed perfectly, but because it was real. Because it spoke to the part of people that the world often ignores, the part that's tired of excuses and hungry for transformation. That's another big promise of Merry Christmas. You must be willing to bet on yourself, even when everyone else calls you crazy. True belief isn't about waiting for proof, it's about creating it. The world doesn't owe you confidence. You must earn it through action. As Goggins reflects on his heart scare, he sees it as a divine reminder that his mission isn't complete. Life isn't done testing him, and it isn't done testing us. Merry Christmas, he says, almost sarcastically, because what the universe gave him wasn't a gift, it was a challenge. A reminder that success can be as dangerous as failure if you start believing you've arrived. By the end of the chapter, Goggins emerges with renewed clarity. Pain and success are both teachers, and both must be respected. The holiday that once symbolized trauma now becomes a metaphor for rebirth, a reminder that even when your heart stops, your purpose must not. The core message of Merry Christmas is brutally simple yet profoundly empowering. You will always face new battles. You will always have to start over. Life will never stop testing your belief, your discipline, and your will to evolve. But if you choose to face those tests with courage and self-honesty, every breakdown can become a breakthrough. In the end, Goggins turns Christmas, a season of comfort, into a season of confrontation. He shows us that success is not a destination but a checkpoint, that belief must be rebuilt daily, and that every time life shocks you, literally or metaphorically, it's just making sure your heart still beats for the right reasons. So when life throws you your version of Merry Christmas, remember what Goggins teaches. Don't run from the test. Rise to it. Stop waiting for comfort. Stop blaming circumstance, and start betting on yourself again. Because as long as you're alive, the mission isn't over. You are never finished. In Chapter 3 of Never Finished, titled The Mental Lab, David Goggins invites us inside the most sacred, dangerous, and transformative place he has ever built. Not a gym, not a battlefield, not a Navy SEAL training ground, but a mental space he calls the lab. This is where pain becomes information, failure becomes feedback, and suffering becomes the raw material of greatness. It's not just a metaphor, it's a system, a mindset, and a way of life. And in this chapter, Goggins explains how anyone can enter their own mental lab to rewire their mind, rebuild their identity, and rise above every obstacle life throws their way. At this point in his story, Goggins has already survived the hells of childhood abuse, military failure, and self-doubt. He's conquered incredible physical feats, ultramarathons, world records, and the Navy SEALs. But he's not interested in past victories. In Never Finished, Goggins constantly reminds us that success is temporary, and comfort is the enemy of progress. The question isn't, what have you done? It's, what are you doing now? And for Goggins, the answer is always the same. He's still in the lab. The chapter opens with a warning. Most people spend their lives avoiding discomfort, escaping hardship, and searching for shortcuts. They think comfort equals happiness. But Goggins argues that this is the biggest lie we tell ourselves. The mind, like a muscle, only grows under stress. Without pain, it weakens. Without friction, it stagnates. And that's why the mental lab exists. It's the place where you deliberately put yourself under pressure to expand your limits, to build mental calluses strong enough to withstand anything. He explains that his mental lab isn't a physical room or a training center. It's an internal fortress, a space inside his mind where he dissects his fears, failures, and insecurities with surgical precision. Every setback becomes an experiment. Every obstacle becomes data. Every pain point is studied, not avoided. Most people experience pain and immediately look for escape. They complain, they numb themselves, they distract their minds. Goggins does the opposite. He magnifies it. He slows it down, examines it, and learns from it. He describes the mental lab as a kind of psychological laboratory where your emotions, weaknesses, and limits are placed under a microscope. You become both the subject and the scientist of your own evolution. He says, in the lab, you don't just face pain. You study it until you understand what it's trying to teach you. Because every time you break down, you're collecting data about who you are, how far you can go, and what it takes to go even further. One of the most powerful lessons in this chapter comes from Goggins' experience with recovery after injury. During a training cycle, he's forced to stop running due to stress fractures and surgeries. And for a man whose entire identity revolves around movement and endurance, being grounded feels like death. But rather than spiral into frustration, he takes the pain of immobility into the mental lab. He asks himself, what can I learn from this? What weakness in me is this moment exposing? Instead of complaining, he experiments. He adjusts his training, his mindset, and his perspective. The lesson is clear. Pain isn't punishment. It's information. The way you interpret it determines whether you crumble or grow. And that's where the big promise of this chapter begins to take shape. You can train your mind to become as strong as your body, even stronger, if you're willing to embrace discomfort as your greatest teacher. Goggins teaches that the mental lab is built on brutal honesty. Inside it, there's no ego, no excuses, no filters. You face the truth about who you are, not the version you show to others, but the one that hides in the shadows of your self-doubt. That's where growth starts. He tells us that most people don't evolve because they're too busy protecting their image, avoiding criticism, and pretending they're already strong. But in the lab, you strip all that away. You see your flaws clearly. You face your weaknesses. And only then can you rebuild yourself with intention. Throughout the chapter, Goggins revisits the same theme that defines his philosophy: discipline over motivation. Motivation, he says, is temporary. It dies the moment life gets hard. Discipline, however, is built in the lab. It's forged in repetition, in silence, in struggle. When nobody's watching, when there's no applause, when you're alone with your thoughts, that's where discipline is born. He also challenges the idea that failure is something to fear. To Goggins, failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of the formula. In the mental lab, failure becomes data. Every time you fall short, you learn something vital about your limits and how to push beyond them. The only real failure, he insists, is refusing to try because you're afraid of pain. One of the most gripping moments in the chapter comes when Goggins talks about how most people misinterpret strength. They think toughness means being unbreakable. But true toughness, he says, is the ability to be broken again and again and rebuild yourself stronger each time. The human mind, when trained properly, becomes like a diamond, cut, shaped, and hardened through relentless pressure. He calls this process mental callousing. Just like physical calluses on your hands, your mind must develop layers of toughness through repeated exposure to stress. Every hardship you endure becomes another layer of armor. Every time you show up when you don't want to, your mind grows thicker, stronger, more unshakable. Another big promise of this chapter is that you can create invincible confidence not by avoiding struggle, but by surviving it repeatedly. Confidence, in Goggins' world, isn't built by affirmations or self-help quotes. It's built through proof, the evidence you collect from your own hard work. Every time you conquer a fear, every time you finish a workout you wanted to quit, you prove to yourself that you are capable. That's belief, earned belief. By the end of the mental lab, Goggins makes it clear that this place of internal warfare is not reserved for elite soldiers or ultra-athletes. It's for everyone. Anyone can create their own lab. All it takes is the willingness to face yourself. It's where ordinary people turn extraordinary, where excuses die, and where evolution begins. He leaves us with a challenge: to stop running from the hard things, to stop seeking comfort as a reward and start seeking discomfort as the path. Because every difficult thing you choose to do voluntarily, every early morning, every painful workout, every honest self-reflection builds your lab. And the more you test yourself, the more you grow. The ultimate promise of this chapter is this: your mind can be trained to turn every obstacle into opportunity, every pain into progress, and every failure into fuel, but only if you're willing to stay in the lab long enough to learn. So, as you step away from this chapter, remember what Goggins teaches. The path to strength is not paved in comfort. You must build your mental lab, lock yourself inside it, and study your suffering until it becomes your superpower. Because in that crucible of pain and honesty, you will find the greatest discovery of all, that the limits you thought defined you were never real. You were never broken. You were just unfinished. There comes a moment in every warrior's life when comfort begins to whisper, when success starts to soften the edges of hunger, and when the same fire that once fueled greatness begins to fade. In Chapter 4 of Never Finished, titled A Savage Reborn, David Goggins confronts that moment, the terrifying realization that even the strongest minds can grow weak, even the most disciplined people can drift into complacency, and even savages can lose their edge. This chapter is a brutal and deeply human exploration of what it means to rebuild yourself after you've already made it, and how to reignite the savage within when the world expects you to relax, celebrate, and slow down. Goggins begins this chapter not in a dark place of failure or loss, but in the dangerous comfort of success. After the enormous impact of Can't Hurt Me, his name has become legendary. He's admired, respected, and in many ways, untouchable. People see him as the symbol of mental toughness, a living example of relentless grit. But beneath that reputation, something is quietly dying. For the first time in years, he feels the weight of pride creeping in, and with it, a subtle but powerful sense of ease. And that, he says, is where weakness begins, not in pain, but in peace. He calls it the trap of arrival. It's what happens when you've reached the summit of one mountain and forget that life is full of others waiting to be climbed. Success, he warns, is the most seductive form of destruction. It tells you you've earned the right to rest, that you've done enough, that you're better than others. And the moment you believe it, you stop sharpening your sword. You stop evolving. You start dying. In this chapter, Goggins reminds us that being a savage isn't about anger, aggression, or bravado. It's about hunger. A savage is someone who refuses to settle, who keeps pushing the limits no matter how much they've already achieved. He says, a savage isn't born, he's built. And if you stop building, you stop being one. The real challenge isn't becoming great once. It's staying great when everything around you encourages you to relax. We see Goggins caught between his past identity, the man who thrived in suffering, and the new version of himself who is now being celebrated by the world. He finds himself questioning, have I gone soft? The man who used to run 100-mile races in brutal heat and train like a machine now feels the temptation of luxury, comfort, and recognition. And that internal conflict becomes the foundation of a savage reborn. He describes waking up one morning and realizing he had become the very thing he used to despise, comfortable. He wasn't chasing pain anymore. He wasn't training with the same fury. He was coasting. And for someone like Goggins, coasting feels like dying slowly. So he decides to do what he always does when he senses weakness. He goes back to war with himself. That war begins with an honest inventory. He calls it the accountability check. Just like the accountability mirror from Can't Hurt Me, this is his process of stripping away ego and confronting the truth. He looks at his actions, his habits, his routines, and his mindset, and what he sees isn't the savage he used to be. It's a man living off his reputation. That realization disgusts him, and it reignites the fire. He starts training again, but this time with a different kind of pain, not physical, but emotional. It's the pain of humility. He reminds himself that no one cares what you've done. The world only sees what you're doing now. Every day you wake up, your resume resets. Yesterday's victories don't count anymore. In Goggins' world, greatness isn't permanent. It's a lease you must renew daily through effort, discipline, and suffering. One of the key big promises of this chapter is this: you must constantly reinvent yourself or you will decay. The person you were yesterday can't get you to the next level. Evolution is not optional, it's required. And reinvention always begins with destruction. Goggins says, "To become a savage again, I had to kill the man I'd become." That's the paradox of growth. To rise higher, you must be willing to let go of your old identity, no matter how successful it made you. He takes us into his mindset as he rebuilds his physical and mental toughness. The workouts become rituals of rebirth, not about setting new records, but about reclaiming his discipline. Each run, each push-up, each cold morning becomes a message to himself. I am not done. He calls it chasing the ghost. The ghost is that perfect version of you, the person you could become if you gave everything you had, every day, without compromise. That chase never ends. Goggins also reveals the emotional toll of this transformation. Success isolates him. The more he pushes himself, the fewer people understand him. Friends fade away because they can't relate to his intensity. The world sees his grind as obsession, but to Goggins, it's salvation. He explains that the path to self-mastery is lonely, because very few people are willing to live with the level of honesty and discipline that true growth demands. Another big promise of this chapter is that comfort will never satisfy you if you were born to grow. The more you feed comfort, the hungrier your soul becomes for meaning. That hunger can only be fed by purpose, struggle, and continuous evolution. Goggins teaches that real happiness doesn't come from achievement, it comes from progress. And progress only happens when you're uncomfortable. Throughout A Savage Reborn, Goggins dismantles the illusion that strength is something you achieve once and keep forever. Strength, he says, is a living thing. It must be fed with challenge, doubt, and discomfort. When you stop feeding it, it starves. When you feed it, it grows. By the end of the chapter, we witness a man who has burned away his complacency and resurrected his inner warrior. The savage within him isn't fueled by fame or external validation. It's powered by discipline, humility, and an insatiable desire to keep evolving. He reminds us that being a savage doesn't mean being the best. It means never settling for less than your best. The ultimate promise of this chapter can be summed up in one line. When you think you've arrived, start over. Because the moment you stop chasing growth, you begin your decline. The world may praise your accomplishments, but the mirror doesn't lie. Only you know if you're truly giving everything you have. So, as Goggins says, stay hard, but more importantly, stay humble. The savage is reborn not through victory, but through struggle, not through applause, but through silence. And if you're willing to face yourself every day, to destroy your ego, embrace discomfort, and rebuild from the ashes, then you, too, can become a savage reborn. In the end, Chapter 4 is a wake-up call for anyone resting on yesterday's success. It's Goggins standing at the crossroads of comfort and greatness, choosing the harder path again and daring us to do the same. Because growth doesn't end with success. It ends when you stop demanding more of yourself. And if you want to live a life of mastery, of power, of purpose, you must be willing, every single day, to be a savage reborn. Discipline. It's a word that sounds simple, but in David Goggins' world, it's sacred. In Chapter 5 of Never Finished, titled Disciple of Discipline, we witness the full transformation of Goggins from a man obsessed with achievement to a man devoted to the daily practice of mastery. This chapter isn't about motivation or inspiration or chasing temporary highs. It's about building a lifestyle of relentless consistency, the kind of self-control that turns ordinary people into legends. Through deeply personal stories, hard truths, and mental warfare, Goggins explains how discipline is not a punishment. It's the highest form of freedom. And in this chapter, he doesn't just tell us how to be disciplined. He shows us what it costs, why it matters, and how it becomes the foundation of an unbreakable life. We begin this chapter with Goggins at a familiar crossroads. He's rebuilt himself after the comfort trap, reignited the savage within, and reclaimed his hunger. But now, the question becomes, how do you stay sharp once you've found your edge again? The answer, he says, is simple but brutal, through discipline. Not the kind you perform when others are watching, but the kind you live when no one will ever know. The invisible kind. The kind that requires you to show up for yourself day after day, in silence, in darkness, in solitude. He explains that discipline is the glue that holds everything else together. Motivation fades. Talent can vanish. Inspiration dies the moment life gets hard. But discipline, real, practiced, daily discipline, never abandons you. It's what wakes you up before dawn when your body screams for rest. It's what pushes you to run when no one's keeping score. It's what forces you to study, practice, and refine when everyone else has already quit. Goggins shares a powerful story about training for a 200-mile ultramarathon. Not a race he was excited for, not a goal driven by glory, but a mission to test the limits of his discipline. He describes the weeks leading up to it, the freezing mornings, the aching legs, the days when every part of his body begged him to stop. But he didn't run for medals or records. He ran because discipline demanded it. It was his contract with himself, the unbreakable agreement that said, I don't need a reason to do what must be done. This chapter's big promise hits early and hard. Discipline is the only path to true freedom. Most people believe freedom means doing whatever you want, whenever you want. But Goggins flips that idea upside down. Real freedom, he says, comes from control. Control over your mind, your body, your emotions, and your habits. Freedom is earned when you no longer need to negotiate with laziness, temptation, or fear. The disciplined man doesn't chase comfort. He commands himself. He paints a vivid picture of how most people live as prisoners of their own emotions. They wait to feel like doing the work. They wait for motivation, inspiration, or the right mood. But the truth, Goggins says, is that feelings are unreliable. If you build your life around them, you'll never achieve anything meaningful. Discipline doesn't ask how you feel. It asks what you've committed to. It doesn't care if you're tired, sad, unmotivated, or scared. Discipline demands you show up anyway. He gives the example of his daily routine, waking up before dawn, training for hours, stretching for long sessions, reading, writing, and pushing his body to its limits even when there's no event or competition ahead. For him, discipline is not about external validation. It's about internal strength. It's the proof that he's still in control of his life. He says, every day, I build myself into someone who can't be broken because I know the world will try. That's the essence of this chapter. Discipline is how you armor your soul against chaos. Another crucial promise of this chapter is that discipline transforms pain into power. Every time you force yourself to do what's hard, you're building resilience. You're teaching your mind that pain isn't a signal to stop. It's a signal to continue. Pain becomes fuel. Failure becomes feedback. Each repetition of effort becomes another layer of mental callus that protects you from weakness. Goggins says, you must train your mind the way a warrior trains his sword, daily, deliberately, and without mercy. In one of the most gripping sections, he reflects on how discipline saved him from the dangers of success. He explains that fame and recognition are seductive. People start treating you differently. They tell you you've done enough, that you can slow down now. But discipline is the voice that cuts through that noise. It whispers, stay sharp. Discipline doesn't care about applause. It's loyal only to the work. He also dives deep into the spiritual side of discipline. To Goggins, discipline isn't just about habits, it's about faith. It's believing that your effort will pay off even when the results aren't visible yet. It's trusting that consistency will always outperform bursts of passion. He reminds us that in every moment of weakness, you have two choices: to be a slave to your feelings or a disciple of your purpose. The disciple chooses the work every time. There's a striking metaphor in this chapter where Goggins compares discipline to a religion. You must worship the process, not the outcome. You must build altars to routine, rituals to repetition. You don't pray for strength. You create it through sweat, effort, and endless sacrifice. You become a disciple of something greater than yourself, your potential. The final big promise of the chapter is perhaps its most profound. Discipline guarantees progress, even when motivation is dead. Life will never stop testing you. You will lose motivation, face doubt, and be tempted to quit. But if you've built discipline, you've built a system that works even when you don't feel like working. That's the secret weapon. You stop being a slave to emotions and become a master of action. By the end of Disciple of Discipline, Goggins brings everything full circle. He tells us that discipline is not about perfection, it's about persistence. You will fail, you will fall, you will have bad days. But discipline doesn't care. It tells you to get up again and again and again until consistency becomes identity. He ends the chapter with a challenge. Don't be motivated. Be dedicated. Be a disciple. Because motivation is fleeting, but discipline is forever. It's what separates those who dream from those who do. It's what transforms potential into performance, weakness into strength, and ordinary lives into extraordinary legacies. So, the next time you wake up tired, uninspired, and ready to quit, remember what Goggins teaches here. Discipline is not the enemy of freedom, it's the birthplace of it. The disciplined mind is the freest mind because it no longer needs permission to act. That's what it means to be a disciple of discipline, to worship effort, to honor consistency, and to live with the relentless devotion of someone who is truly never finished. There's an old saying in boxing: everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. In Chapter 6 of Never Finished, titled The Art of Getting Hit in the Mouth, David Goggins takes that metaphor and turns it into a philosophy for life. This is one of the most powerful, humbling, and brutally honest chapters in the entire book. A deep dive into what happens when life hits you harder than you expected, when your plans fall apart, and when everything you've built begins to crumble. Goggins doesn't just tell us how to take a hit. He teaches us how to absorb it, learn from it, and come back swinging harder than ever before. By this point in the book, Goggins has already rebuilt himself multiple times, through poverty, pain, and physical breakdowns. He's a man known for pushing past suffering, for conquering fear through relentless discipline. But in this chapter, he shows a different kind of toughness, not the toughness of winning, but the toughness of enduring when everything goes wrong. Because as he reminds us, being strong isn't about how you act when you're winning. It's about how you respond when you're on your knees, bleeding, broken, and doubting everything. The chapter begins with a story. Goggins preparing for yet another ultra-endurance race, a long, punishing event designed to push even the strongest athletes to their breaking point. But this time, his body starts to give out in unexpected ways. Pain radiates through his knees, his lungs tighten, his breathing becomes erratic. He feels himself unraveling, not from lack of will, but from something deeper, the accumulated toll of years of self-imposed suffering. His body, once his greatest weapon, is now turning against him. For most people, that would be the moment to quit, to finally listen to the voice that says, "You've done enough. You've earned a break." But for Goggins, that voice is the enemy. He doesn't run to win anymore. He runs to learn. And this time, life is teaching him one of the hardest lessons of all: how to stay in the fight when you're out of strength. The big promise of this chapter comes through early and fiercely. You can't avoid getting hit in life, but you can train yourself to recover faster, to think clearly under pressure, and to use every blow as a lesson in resilience. Pain is inevitable. Failure is guaranteed. But suffering, Goggins insists, is where growth hides. The art isn't in avoiding the hit, it's in using it to evolve. He compares getting hit in the mouth to life's unexpected challenges, the betrayal that blindsides you, the loss that crushes you, the failure that destroys your confidence. Everyone has a plan for success, but almost no one has a plan for failure. That's why so many people quit when life gets ugly. They've trained for comfort, not for chaos. Goggins wants to change that. In The Art of Getting Hit in the Mouth, he invites us into the mental framework of a fighter, someone who expects to get hit, who accepts it as part of the process, and who doesn't lose composure when it happens. He explains that true strength is measured not by how perfectly you execute your plan, but by how fast you can adapt when your plan disintegrates. Life, like a fight, will always hit harder than you expect. But if you've built the mental toughness to absorb the blow, assess the situation, and keep moving forward, you'll always find a way to win. One of the most striking parts of this chapter is Goggins' reflection on humility. When his body begins to fail him, he realizes that strength alone isn't enough. For years, he believed that sheer willpower could overcome anything. But now, faced with physical limitations and the reality of aging, he must learn a new lesson, that wisdom, patience, and adaptability are just as important as raw toughness. The savage within him isn't gone, it's evolving. This is what makes this chapter so powerful. It's not about never falling. It's about learning how to fall with purpose. Another big promise of this chapter is that your ability to recover is your greatest advantage in life. The faster you can recover from setbacks, emotionally, mentally, physically, the harder it becomes for life to defeat you. Goggins teaches that recovery isn't just about rest, it's about reflection. Every hit you take gives you data, information about your weaknesses, your patterns, and your pain points. In his mental lab, he dissects those hits the same way a fighter studies tape after a loss. Where did I drop my guard? What did I miss? What can I improve? That process of reflection turns pain into progress. He also discusses ego, that invisible force that makes us cling to our identity, our status, and our expectations. The ego hates being hit. It takes every setback personally. It tells you that losing means you're worthless. But in Goggins' world, ego is a liability. To master the art of getting hit, you must first kill your ego. You must accept that being hurt doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're alive. Every scar is proof that you had the courage to step into the arena. In one of the chapter's most memorable passages, Goggins talks about how every major transformation in his life began with a painful blow. His father's abuse, his failures in the Air Force, his heartbreaks, his injuries. Each hit forced him to rebuild, to learn, to adapt. Each hit revealed a new layer of resilience he didn't know existed. And that, he says, is what it means to be never finished. You never stop getting hit, and you never stop learning how to get back up. The chapter also explores the importance of composure, keeping your mind steady when the world feels like it's falling apart. Goggins says, when you get hit in the mouth, panic is your enemy. The person who stays calm in chaos is the one who wins. He draws parallels between life and combat. How the best fighters aren't the ones who avoid punches, but the ones who stay aware and strategic even as blood runs down their face. That same calmness, he argues, must be cultivated in everyday life. Whether you're facing financial loss, emotional pain, or failure at work, composure is your weapon. As the chapter nears its end, Goggins makes another profound promise. Pain and adversity don't take from you. They reveal you. Every hardship strips away the layers of comfort, pride, and pretense, exposing who you truly are underneath. When life hits you in the mouth, it's not trying to destroy you. It's trying to introduce you to yourself. He closes the chapter with one of his most iconic lines, a reminder that toughness isn't a shield, but a skill. You will never be ready for life's punches. So stop trying to be ready. Instead, learn how to take the hit. Keep your eyes open and move forward. That's the art. The message of Chapter 6, The Art of Getting Hit in the Mouth, is clear, timeless, and universal. Life will hit you, hard, often, and without warning. You can't avoid it, but you can prepare for it. You can learn from it. You can rise from it. And if you build the mental and emotional armor that Goggins calls discipline, humility, and resilience, you'll discover that no punch, no matter how painful, can ever knock out your spirit. Because in the end, greatness isn't defined by how you hit. It's defined by how you handle getting hit. That's the art. That's the lesson. And that's what makes you never finished. There comes a moment in every person's journey where the enemy you've been fighting is no longer out there. It's in the mirror. In Chapter 7 of Never Finished, titled The Reckoning, David Goggins turns his unflinching gaze inward and confronts the most dangerous opponent of all, himself. This chapter is not about physical endurance, broken bones, or marathons through pain. It's about the silent war that begins once the applause fades, once success has been achieved, and once your own reflection starts to lie to you. The Reckoning is a brutal confrontation with ego, illusion, and self-deception, and through it, Goggins delivers some of the most powerful lessons in the entire book about humility, truth, and accountability. At this point in Goggins' story, he's already become a household name. His story of transformation, from an abused, overweight, insecure kid to a Navy SEAL, ultra-endurance athlete, and author of Can't Hurt Me, has inspired millions. People see him as invincible, a man of iron will. But inside, something begins to shift. The same fame that validated his struggle also begins to poison it. He finds himself being treated differently, praised endlessly, admired by strangers, invited to speak on the biggest stages. Everywhere he goes, people tell him he's a hero. And that's where the cracks start to form. Goggins explains that ego is a silent assassin. It doesn't arrive suddenly. It sneaks in, disguised as confidence, accomplishment, and pride. Slowly, without realizing it, he begins to believe the image the world has created of him. David Goggins, the toughest man alive. And once that belief takes root, he starts to drift away from the mindset that built him in the first place. The mindset of humility, discipline, and constant growth. That's when the reckoning begins. The big promise of this chapter is both humbling and universal. If you don't confront your ego, your success will become your downfall. Goggins wants us to understand that the hardest battle in life isn't becoming successful. It's staying grounded after you are. Success creates comfort, and comfort breeds blindness. The moment you start believing you've arrived, you stop evolving. The reckoning, he says, is the process of tearing down the false image of who you think you are, so you can rediscover who you really are beneath it all. He describes an internal spiral, a growing disconnect between the person the world sees and the man he feels himself becoming. He starts to question whether he's still living by the same principles he preaches. He's still training hard, still grinding, but something is missing. That raw hunger, that purity of purpose, it's dulled by attention, by praise, by comfort. For the first time in years, he feels like he's performing a version of himself instead of living it. This realization hits him like a punch to the gut. He realizes that the greatest threat to his growth isn't failure or pain anymore. It's success itself. Because success tricks the mind into thinking the work is done. It tells you you've earned the right to relax. And once you start listening to that voice, you start dying. Goggins admits that his biggest mistake was forgetting that the journey of mastery never ends. That's why he calls it The Reckoning. Because this is the chapter where he forces himself to reckon with the truth of who he's become. He does what very few people have the courage to do. he steps back from his own myth and begins to dismantle it. He stops performing for the world and starts reflecting for himself. He takes out his journal, the same one he's used for years to track his growth, and begins writing brutally honest notes about his life. He calls this process mental auditing. Every thought, every excuse, every inconsistency gets exposed. He writes about where he's been soft, where he's made excuses, where he's stopped living at the edge. It's a painful process, but it's also cleansing. He says, "You can't fix what you refuse to see. And the only way to see the truth is to shine a light on your lies." One of the most profound messages in this chapter is that self-honesty is the foundation of self-mastery. Most people will spend their whole lives running from the truth because it hurts. It hurts to admit that you've become lazy, complacent, or hypocritical. It hurts to admit that the person you show to the world isn't the person you truly are. But Goggins insists that pain is the price of progress. Honesty hurts, but it heals, too. He compares the reckoning to standing in front of the accountability mirror, a concept he introduced in Can't Hurt Me. Back then, the mirror was about facing your weaknesses to become stronger. Now, it's about facing your ego to stay humble. He tells us that even the strongest, most disciplined people are vulnerable to pride. The difference between those who grow and those who fall is awareness. You must constantly audit your motives, your actions, and your integrity. Another big promise of this chapter is that real growth requires you to destroy the old version of yourself. Even if that version was successful, Goggins calls this self-demolition. He explains that sometimes you have to burn down the walls that once protected you because they've now become your prison. The version of you that got you here isn't the version that will take you further. Evolution demands destruction. He describes returning to the basics, training harder, doing the small, gritty work that no one sees. No cameras, no social media, no applause. Just sweat, pain, and silence. He reintroduces discomfort into his life deliberately, seeking out suffering the way a blacksmith seeks fire, not to prove something to others, but to purify himself again. He wants to remember what it feels like to earn respect from himself, not from fans or followers. One of the most compelling parts of this chapter is Goggins' exploration of loneliness. He acknowledges that true accountability often isolates you because few people are willing to live at that level of honesty. When you stop lying to yourself, you can no longer tolerate the lies of others. You become an outsider in a world that thrives on comfort and illusion. But Goggins embraces that loneliness. He says, the path to truth is narrow, and it's usually walked alone. By the end of the reckoning, Goggins has stripped himself down to the core. No ego, no image, no performance. Just discipline, humility, and purpose. He reminds us that the journey of becoming never finished isn't a straight line. It's a constant cycle of rising, falling, and rebuilding. Each time you grow, you'll face a new reckoning, a new test of honesty. And every time you pass that test, you evolve into a higher version of yourself. The final big promise of this chapter is this. The moment you stop lying to yourself is the moment you reclaim control of your life. When you live in truth, no one can manipulate you, no success can seduce you, and no failure can break you. You become untouchable, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Goggins ends the chapter with a message that cuts through every illusion. Don't let success make you forget who you are. Don't let ego steal your hunger. And don't ever stop reckoning with yourself. Because that's what keeps you honest. That's what keeps you growing. And that's what keeps you never finished. Life is not over when you're tired. It's not over when you're hurt. It's not even over when everyone around you says you should quit. It's over only when the final whistle blows. And in Chapter 8 of Never Finished, titled Play Until the Whistle, David Goggins reminds us that as long as we're breathing, there's still work to do. This chapter is one of the most powerful and emotional in the book. It's not just about endurance in the physical sense. It's about perseverance in the deepest human sense. The will to keep showing up, keep giving, and keep fighting long after the world thinks your time is done. By now in the book, Goggins has taken us through suffering, humility, rebuilding, and reckoning. He's faced physical and emotional collapse, ego, and success. But here, he looks towards something bigger, the battle with time itself. Play Until the Whistle is a story about refusing to coast through the later stages of life, refusing to accept the illusion of retirement, and rejecting the quiet death of purpose that comes when people decide they've done enough. For Goggins, life is not about slowing down. It's about finding new reasons to keep pushing, new levels to reach, and new ways to serve. The chapter begins with a moment that most people would call success. Goggins is established. He's written best-selling books, built a reputation, and inspired millions. He could have stopped there. Most people would have. But deep inside, he feels a pull, a whisper that says, "You're not finished yet." And that's when the message of this chapter crystallizes. Life has no off-season. He recalls meeting older veterans, men who had once been strong, sharp, and disciplined, but who had allowed time and comfort to dull their edge. They lived in the glory of who they once were, talking endlessly about what they used to do. That phrase, used to, becomes Goggins' trigger. He refuses to be a used to man. He refuses to let his legacy turn into nostalgia. He says, "It doesn't matter how old you are, how broken you are, or how tired you are. If you can still breathe, you can still fight." That's the big promise of this chapter. You don't stop when you're tired. You stop when you're done. And you are never done until life itself blows the final whistle. It's about redefining what it means to age, to endure, to live with purpose. To drive this point home, Goggins shares the story of one of his most brutal endurance challenges, the Moab 240, a 240-mile ultramarathon through the desert of Utah. He runs through blistering heat, freezing nights, hallucinations, and total exhaustion. His legs are swollen, his joints ache, and his mind begins to fracture under the weight of pain. During the race, his body begs him to stop. His mind tempts him with comfort. But he reminds himself of the law of the whistle. The game isn't over yet. He describes a scene that feels cinematic, stumbling through the desert night, vision blurred, body failing, hearing only the sound of his own ragged breath and the pounding of his heart. In that moment, he has a choice, to surrender to pain or to play until the whistle. And like every great fighter, he chooses to keep moving, not because he enjoys the suffering, but because he refuses to leave unfinished work behind. Every step becomes a metaphor for life itself, slow, painful, deliberate, but forward, always forward. What separates Goggins from most people is not his physical toughness, but his refusal to negotiate with weakness. He knows that the human mind always looks for a way out, a justification to stop, to rest, to quit early. But life, he says, doesn't reward those who give up when it gets hard. It rewards those who find a way to stay in the game. The whistle hasn't blown. You're still breathing. That means you still have a chance to win. In one of the most reflective moments of the chapter, Goggins talks about the people who have inspired him the most. Not the record holders or the champions, but the ordinary people who kept showing up no matter how hard life hit them. The single mother working 2 jobs. The veteran learning to walk again. The man battling addiction. The woman fighting cancer who refuses to give up her smile. These are the people, he says, who truly play until the whistle. They remind him that greatness isn't about perfection or fame. It's about persistence. It's about grit. Another big promise of this chapter is that the game of life doesn't end until you decide it does. Age, pain, failure. None of these are the finish line unless you make them one. Goggins challenges the reader or the listener to rethink what it means to be alive. He says, the day you stop chasing improvement, the day you stop setting goals, the day you stop pushing, that's the day you start dying. He also explores the mental side of perseverance, how to keep your mind sharp when your body starts to slow down. He introduces what he calls mental reps, small daily practices that keep your focus and drive alive even when physical limits appear. He journals, stretches, reads, reflects, and meditates on the question, am I still moving forward or have I started standing still? Through this chapter, Goggins demolishes the idea that resilience is a one-time achievement. He teaches that resilience must be renewed daily, through choices, through effort, through action. You don't wake up strong, you earn it every morning. And you earn it by showing up even when the motivation is gone, when your body hurts, when your goals feel impossible, when you've already done enough, and you choose to do more anyway. He says, playing until the whistle means being relentless in the face of fatigue, being calm in the face of chaos, and being humble enough to start again when the world expects you to stop. This mindset separates winners from quitters, survivors from victims, and leaders from followers. As the chapter builds toward its close, Goggins reveals the spiritual depth behind the metaphor. The whistle, he says, is not just the end of a game, it's the end of your life. When that moment comes, you won't remember the trophies or applause. You'll remember whether you gave everything you had, whether you played with heart, whether you stayed in the fight when it mattered most. The promise here is life-changing. When you live with relentless effort, you die without regret. By the final pages of Play Until the Whistle, Goggins has taken us full circle, from pain to purpose, from ego to humility, from comfort to conviction. He reminds us that the true measure of a person is not how they start, or even how they perform at their peak, but how they finish the game. He says, most people slow down before the finish line, but the great ones sprint through it. So, he challenges us, when life hits hard, when fatigue sets in, when the crowd disappears and the field grows silent, don't you dare stop playing. Because as long as the whistle hasn't blown, your story isn't over. You're still in the fight. You're still alive. That's the essence of Chapter 8, a rallying cry for the relentless spirit inside us all. A reminder that strength isn't found in comfort, but in endurance. And the greatest victories aren't won by those who had it easy, but by those who kept going when everything inside them screamed to quit. So, no matter where you are, no matter how hard it's gotten, lace up, stand tall, and get back in the game. Because the clock is still ticking. The whistle hasn't blown. And like Goggins says, you are never finished. Every book has an ending, but some endings aren't really the end. They're a challenge, a question, a fire left burning in the reader's hands. Chapter 9 of Never Finished, titled Wringing Out the Soul, is that kind of ending. This final chapter isn't a summary of Goggins' journey. It's the purest distillation of everything he's lived, suffered, and learned. It's about legacy, purpose, and the relentless pursuit of your highest potential. It's a chapter that asks you to look deep inside yourself and decide whether you're truly giving everything you have, or if you've been holding back, saving pieces of yourself for later, waiting for a more convenient time to live fully. The title alone, Wringing Out the Soul, captures the spirit of Goggins' philosophy. Imagine your life as a towel soaked with potential, strength, creativity, courage, love, and purpose. Most people squeeze a little bit of that out over the years, just enough to survive, just enough to look successful. But at the end of their lives, the towel is still half full. They die with energy unspent, dreams unpursued, and potential unexplored. Goggins' mission, as he explains in this chapter, is to die with nothing left inside, to squeeze out every drop of what he has been given, to live so completely that there's nothing left to give when the whistle finally blows. He begins by reflecting on the people he's met throughout his life: warriors, athletes, soldiers, survivors, people who have accomplished incredible things, and yet, many of them still carry the weight of regret. They didn't push far enough. They stopped when they were comfortable. They accepted good enough instead of demanding great. That realization becomes his obsession. Goggins doesn't fear death. He fears untapped potential. He fears meeting the version of himself he could have been. The man who didn't quit, who didn't compromise, who didn't stop evolving. And that fear drives him more than anything else. The big promise of this chapter is clear and unrelenting. You must give everything you have before you leave this earth. Every ounce of strength, talent, kindness, and grit must be used. Because if you don't, you'll die wondering what could have been. Goggins calls this living on empty. It's not about exhaustion. It's about fulfillment. It's about the peace that comes only when you've truly given your all. He paints a vivid picture of what this looks like in his own life. He talks about waking up every morning with the awareness that time is running out. Not in a fearful way, but in a purposeful one. He sees each day as a chance to build, to grow, to contribute, to sharpen his mind and body one more time. He says, "When the sun sets, I ask myself, did I earn the right to rest today? Did I give my best, or did I coast?" That self-check, that daily reckoning, is how he lives without regret. In one of the most emotional moments of the chapter, Goggins describes his experiences visiting veterans who were once elite soldiers but are now struggling with age, injury, and illness. Many of them tell him they would give anything for one more day in their prime, one more chance to push harder, to live more fully, to appreciate what they once had. Those conversations stay with him. They remind him that one day, he too will lose the physical power he has now. Time will take his speed, his endurance, his body, but it can never take his spirit unless he lets it. That's why he trains harder now, why he pushes even when no one's watching, because he wants to face old age with no unfinished business. He says, "Most people are waiting for permission to live, waiting for the perfect moment, the right opportunity, the right conditions. But that moment never comes. You either start wringing out your soul today, or you never will." It's a wake-up call for anyone listening, a challenge to stop postponing greatness and start acting like life is a limited gift. Another big promise of this chapter is that true fulfillment doesn't come from achievement, it comes from effort. Goggins explains that the trophies, medals, and accolades mean nothing compared to the feeling of knowing you gave your all. The work itself, the daily grind, the pain, the progress, that's where meaning lives. Because when you love the process of becoming your best, you stop being afraid of endings. You've already given everything, and that's freedom. He also dives deep into the spiritual dimension of his philosophy. For Goggins, wringing out the soul is not just about physical performance. It's about character, compassion, and contribution. He believes that every person is born with a divine responsibility to make the most of their time here, not just for themselves, but for others. When you give everything to your growth, your example gives permission for others to rise, too. You become proof of what's possible. He shares stories of people who have reached out to him, men and women from all walks of life who have found strength through his example. People who lost hundreds of pounds, who overcame addiction, who rebuilt their lives after trauma. These messages remind him that his mission isn't about personal glory, it's about service. It's about showing others that they, too, can keep going no matter how broken they feel. One of the most profound insights in this chapter is Goggins' idea of soul over success. He explains that success is external, it's how the world measures you. But the soul is internal, it's how you measure yourself. When you chase success, you'll always be chasing validation. But when you focus on wringing out your soul, you no longer care about applause or comparison. You care only about whether you're growing, learning, and giving. That's where real peace comes from. By the end of the chapter, Goggins brings his message full circle. The same kid who once felt broken, lost, and worthless has become a man who sees pain as a gift, discipline as freedom, and life as an opportunity to serve. But even now, he refuses to call himself finished. He knows there's still more to do, more to give, more to learn. He tells us, when it's over, I want to be on that final day knowing I left nothing behind. No energy, no effort, no excuses. That's what it means to wring out your soul. The final big promise of this chapter, and of the entire book, is that you can die empty if you live full. Every ounce of energy you spend chasing growth, truth, and purpose will come back to you as peace. You can live without fear of failure or regret, because you'll know you've honored the life you were given. And so, Never Finished closes not with an ending, but with a beginning, an invitation to start your own reckoning, to build your own discipline, to play your own game until the whistle, and to wring out your soul completely before the final day comes. As Goggins says in his final words, when you're gone, the world won't remember how comfortable you were, how safe you played it, or how much you avoided pain. It will remember what you gave, how hard you pushed, how deep you loved, and how completely you lived. So don't hold back. Don't wait. Wring out your soul. Because when it's all over, that's the only thing that matters. That's the closing message of David Goggins' Never Finished. Life is short, pain is temporary, and your potential is infinite. So give everything and leave nothing undone. Life is a battle that never ends. Every sunrise is another round, every challenge another test, and every moment a chance to choose between comfort and growth. That is the essence of Never Finished by David Goggins, a book that doesn't just inspire you for a moment, but redefines how you look at struggle, purpose, and human potential. As we reach the conclusion of this powerful journey, one truth becomes clear. This isn't a self-help book, it's a survival guide for the soul. David Goggins' message throughout Never Finished is raw, honest, and deeply human. He's not trying to sell you a dream. He's trying to prepare you for the war that is life. Every chapter is a reminder that the road to greatness is paved with pain, sacrifice, and relentless self-honesty. From the very beginning, he told us that we are all unfinished projects, works in progress, constantly evolving, constantly fighting against the pull of comfort and complacency. The big promise of the book is this: you will never find peace by avoiding pain. You find peace by mastering it. Goggins' entire philosophy revolves around this one idea, that suffering is the ultimate teacher. It's through pain, setbacks, and adversity that we discover who we truly are. In the introduction, he makes it clear that self-mastery is a never-ending process. No matter how much you've achieved, no matter how strong or successful you think you are never done. You are never finished. The journey of growth and self-discovery is infinite, and your mission is to walk that path with discipline, humility, and hunger every single day. Throughout the book, Goggins proves that mastery doesn't come from motivation or talent. It comes from consistency. He teaches that the strongest people are not those who never fall, but those who get up again and again, no matter how many times life hits them. Whether it's confronting trauma and maximize minimal potential, facing health scares and self-doubt in Merry Christmas, building mental toughness in the mental lab, or rediscovering hunger in A Savage Reborn, every story reminds us that growth begins when the excuses end. One of the biggest lessons Goggins drives home in this conclusion is that comfort is the enemy of evolution. The moment you settle, you stop living. He warns that the world will try to convince you that you've done enough, that you've earned the right to relax. But those are lies that kill potential. Success is not a destination. It's a trap if you stop there. True success is staying disciplined enough to keep reinventing yourself. As Goggins says, you must destroy who you were to become who you're meant to be. Another big promise of Never Finished is that discipline is the ultimate form of freedom. When you live by discipline, you no longer wait for motivation. You no longer rely on external validation or perfect conditions. You act because you've made a commitment to yourself. You become a disciple of discipline, as he calls it, someone who shows up every day regardless of how you feel. Goggins reminds us that success doesn't belong to the talented or the lucky. It belongs to those who are willing to suffer longer than everyone else. Then comes one of the most human parts of the book, the reckoning. It's here that Goggins turns his philosophy inward and faces his own ego. He reminds us that no one, not even the strongest among us, is immune to pride or complacency. The reckoning is about stripping away illusions, auditing your life, and confronting the uncomfortable truth about who you've become. The promise is this: honesty is the foundation of greatness. When you stop lying to yourself, you stop limiting yourself. In Play Until the Whistle, Goggins delivers his message of endurance, that life doesn't stop until it's truly over. Whether you're young or old, healthy or broken, rich or struggling, as long as you're alive, there's still work to do. The whistle hasn't blown yet. This metaphor becomes the heartbeat of the book's conclusion, a call to live with urgency, purpose, and relentless effort. Because one day, the whistle will blow. And when it does, you want to leave the field knowing you gave everything you had. Finally, in Wringing Out the Soul, Goggins brings everything together. This is where his philosophy transcends physical toughness and becomes spiritual. He challenges you to live in such a way that when your time comes, there's nothing left inside you. No regret, no unused potential, no unspoken words. You must wring out your soul completely, leaving nothing behind. That is the ultimate promise and the ultimate result of never finished, to die empty, knowing you lived full. By the end of this journey, Goggins has given us more than a set of principles. He's given us a blueprint for an unbreakable life. The big result of the book is transformation, not in your body, not in your career, but in your mindset. When you internalize Goggins' lessons, you stop seeing hardship as something to avoid. You start seeing it as the path. You stop wishing for easy days and start preparing for the hard ones. You stop living on autopilot and start living with intent. Goggins' story is proof that no matter who you are, where you come from, or what you've been through, you can take control of your life. You can rebuild your mind, strengthen your spirit, and redefine what's possible for yourself. But you must be willing to do what most people won't, to face your fears, to embrace pain, to confront your truth, and to keep evolving long after the world has stopped watching. That's the difference between the finished and the never finished. And that's why this book is so much more than motivation. It's a lifelong challenge. It's Goggins' way of saying, don't just survive, transcend. Don't just live, evolve. So, as we close this audiobook summary, ask yourself, are you leaving something on the table? Are you holding back your potential, your discipline, your purpose? Because the clock is ticking and the whistle hasn't blown yet. You still have time to become more, give more, and be more. You still have time to squeeze out every drop of your soul before it's too late. That's what David Goggins wants for you. Not comfort, not applause, but evolution. The kind of growth that makes you look back one day and say, I gave everything. I am never finished. If this audiobook summary inspired you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to CliffNote Chronicles, and share it with your friends who need that extra push to chase their best selves. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting to hear these words. Someone is on the edge of giving up. And your share might be the reminder they need to keep going, to play until the whistle, and to wring out their soul completely. This is CliffNote Chronicles. And remember, stay hard, stay humble, and never finished.